Work session's opening. The first agenda item is budget.
First item is budget. So we got two things to go over here. You'll recall that we're coming to you on a monthly basis or more often with an update on where the budget's at. Like Craig had said earlier, we've got some good news from the state. If they call it that, they've got us conditioned that 2.06 is good news. So being that it's a 3-year historic high, or the 3rd year of historic high over the last 10, I guess I'll take that. That obviously had an impact on our budget. We're also getting some additional refinement on some of the numbers on there, so I'll walk through that with you. So I'm going to start all the way at the bottom of the chart. Oh, I apologize. I'll pass these around. Get ahead of myself here. Full size. Well, you still might need them, but hopefully not as bad. Okay, so you remember that when we first came in, we were looking at about a $6.5 million budget deficit. The state has afforded us a little grace there, and so we're at $5.2 million in a target for it. You'll note that the last few times that we've talked to you, the differential's been positive or negative, but it's been close to where we're going. Now you see we zeroed it out. I will walk you through how we got to that point. So now I'm going to go all the way back up to the top of your document, and I'm going to walk through each of the employment categories on there. And before I do that, though, let me remind you, we had this conversation with our admin team today. We spend a lot of time, energy, and effort recruiting new staff members. We also then spend a lot of time, energy, effort inducting them. And so we've got a lot invested in our new staff members at all levels in the district. So one of the things that you'll recall is when we first started talking about this, our big concern was that we needed to reduce our staff by 75 full-time equivalent positions. And obviously that caused a lot of consternation, not only around the admin table, in our conversations with ICEA, out in the buildings. People saw that number, they were very, very worried about that. And so a big part of our effort has been to craft a plan that in the end would have 0 RIFs as the goal. That's the goal. And so what we tried to do is then create a framework that allows us to do that. One of the things that we did early on in the process was we put a hiring freeze in place. We certainly didn't want to be bringing people in that we were simply going to be letting go. So we have used a process of moving folks around on the team to cover vacancies that are available. I used the analysis from our physical plan as one that I think people understand. If you've got a head custodian that leaves, we post internally for it. That person probably comes out of our day crew. And once that position is vacant, we then post that. That probably comes out of our night crew. We then post that one. That fill probably comes out of our sub pool. And we leave that sub-pool position vacant at this time. So, Phil, you have a question?
Well, and kind of along that line, do we have an athletic director that's retiring?
We have 2.
We have 2.
Yes.
Do we see this as an opportunity?
Yes, you'll see that as we walk through.
Okay.
Yep.
Excuse me.
No, that's great. That's foreshadowing. That's exactly what we're looking for. So, the idea is that at the end of the day, we will likely have some positions that are vacant this year. That does not mean that they're permanent, vacant permanently. Our sub-custodian example, Craig and I have been talking about that. We're looking at that and saying, eventually we're going to have to replace those people, right? We've got a couple exceptions, maybe one that's out there, so you might see it and say, hey, wait a minute. Food service is an enterprise fund, so that's separate from our general fund. We struggle like crazy if we don't have people to serve food. So we've got a few positions out there that are vacant right now, and we talked today that we were unable to secure anyone internally that might be interested in moving into those positions from another employment category, so we'll wind up posting those externally. We're short on our custodians, not in our subs, but in our reserve pool or our night pool that's out there. We're down a few hours there. We may post a few out there. Those will be few and far between. But other positions in the district are likely to remain vacant, not only from now through the end of this year, but potentially through the end of next year. And you're going to see that as we walk through here. As the budget recovers, which if you remember Craig's long-term 10-year projection, we anticipate that the budget will recover. That will then give us the opportunity to refill those positions. From a historical perspective, think of school nurses. We went through that back in 13 when we got zeroed out by the state. We reduced some of our nurses through attrition. The budget recovered, we replaced those staff members. So starting at the top with our admin group. And again, I have this in all of these. This is draft only. We're going to be coming to you not only next board meeting on the 12th, but also on the 26th. We're projecting a savings of about $240,000 there. That is leaving a position vacant and restructuring another position. And I've also included, you'll see as you go through here, our FTE counts going back 4 years, so you can see the implication that that holds for each of the strata as we walk through it. At the secondary level, Phil, as you mentioned, oh yeah, sorry.
Are you able to give us more detail? On
Sure.
Right.
So what, right now, Jane's position in HR is being held open as she retires. So we'll recapture that there. We're also looking at how we level out the positions in the district according to the strata that we have. We think we're going to be able to reframe a couple of the positions in there, and that's going to save us some additional dollars. So we're still going through that process. We'll have specific position details as we come in the next couple of weeks.
When you say held open, what do you mean? Is that one that's going to be filled in the future?
We'll leave it open now, so we're not going to fill it. If we're going to fill it in the future, we'll come back and let you know, just like we will as I come down with the AD position. So any of those changes that would be that would occur in the future come back to the board.
So it's actually one down, not filled, and restructuring of some others.
That's correct.
To give you the
237
that you're calling.
Yep. At the secondary level, we've got 2 AD openings. We did post one internally to see if we had any members of our administrative team who were interested in moving into it. Unfortunately, we did not get any takers. We then wound up with a second AD opening. We are going to fill one, but we're going to do it internally, so that posting will be for only certified staff in the district. And that will then create a vacancy for us within our teaching ranks, which is going to help us, as you see, as we move into here. And then the middle school AD right now is housed at North Central, and that position will also be left vacant next year. So internally posting for the AD at City High. So that'll be someone who's currently on staff. They've got 3 potential people who are teachers in the district who are applying for that. And then the middle school AD will be left vacant. Phil, any questions?
So, okay, so you're going to have the middle school AD vacant,
Correct.
and you will have an AD, you plan to have an AD at every high school.
Yes.
Is this time, and I'll throw this one out, is this time to have a discussion on a district AD?
I think we kind of talked about that at the education committee.
We did.
You have, the ones that have a district AD also have individual ones underneath them, so it's not.
Well,
just
and
I don't understand, I mean, we've had this discussion a few times, Phil, and I know, I guess I just don't understand how you think one person can run 3 high school athletic programs. You know, I just, maybe.
It's one district program, with
It
a
is.
secretary with each school.
I understand that, but I don't think you realize the job that they do. I mean, I just don't. I really don't. I don't understand how you think that. I know you always say the University of Iowa has one, but you realize how many people work under that guy? A lot.
So
Yeah,
keep
well, I-
going, Steve. We've got lots to go through here.
We can definitely come back and revisit that. Again, part of our input comes from our building staff, so we go out to the building administrators, and this is a conversation we have with them. I'll be honest with you, Colby Miller's not happy necessarily that he doesn't get to replace it, but he certainly understands the challenge that we have with our staffing right now, so.
Who's gonna pick up those duties though? I mean, I know that's a huge lift that Jeff does.
It is.
I know it struggles though.
We're actually looking to parse it out into 3, and so that'll become part of the assistant principal's roles. What that'll will have to do is that some of the assistant principal roles will have to move to the dean, and of course the problem at North Central is they don't have that position. So Colby will be absorbing some of that on behalf of the team, and he recognizes that. We're looking to provide some assistance for him as he goes through that process. At the next one down is our early retirement savings. I want to draw your attention on the right-hand side. We actually have 54 teachers retiring. 10 of those teachers are special education. Special education is categorically funded, so that does not help our general fund. There is an opportunity for us as we look at staff who are certified in both gen ed and special ed, that we may have some staff that could move into those positions from our gen ed pool, which would then free up some space in our gen ed budget. But absent a voluntary transfer, that would be an involuntary transfer. And so we will be waiting to see what positions are open, what interest there is internally, and you may see that number 44 go up. It would not exceed 54. I'll look at JP because he's got some experience with that, so he knows how
Yeah,
that
it's
process
like, this
works.
is where people with behavior disorder certification are learning this.
Yes.
They're teaching social studies.
Correct. And, keep in mind, we want to make sure that we have the right people on the team, on the right seats on the bus. And there are perfectly appropriate reasons why some people with special ed certification aren't teaching special ed right now, and some of them may hold the certification but have never taught it. So we want to be really judicious about how we go about doing that. So we haven't counted any of those people in this savings. At the elementary level, and we'll come back to this both today and at the next board meeting, you'll see the adjusted weighted resource allocation model chart in there. This was brought up earlier, but I think it bears noting that back in 15-16, we had 431 elementary teachers. For the 18-19 school year, we have 480, so we're up 50 teachers. It's certainly not ideal that we're looking to make adjustments to that formula process we use in the weighted resource allocation model. But through this process, we're essentially moving back maybe about a year, a little more than a year. And again, using that formula gives us the opportunity, as our budget recovers, to move staff back in there on a proportional basis. So none of these are good decisions or good suggestions, but we think that they meet the needs of most of our students. That saves 19 FTEs, which is a total of about $1 million. At the secondary level, we've got a target of 9. We're in the process right now of taking the registrations that students have, working them into the master schedule, doing the reconciliation for conflicts in those students, and then starting to look at, if you remember from Matt's report 2 meetings ago, that long tail of classes that are perhaps undersubscribed. It gives us an opportunity to look at some of those and say, should they be every other year electives instead of every year electives? How do you then propose that to students such that they can plan their coursework so that that class that may meet less frequently than annually still gets into their regular course of
When will
studies?
we know what that looks like? Remind me of the schedule again, the timeline of the registrations and what classes?
Registrations are in right now. They work on building the initial run of the master schedule right now. It's an incredibly complicated
Yeah.
process. And then the next thing is the conflict resolution process. Literally, that can take months. We're trying to accelerate that so that we've got a better idea of where we may find those openings. I'll tell you that secondary is a struggle for us. Brady and I were just talking about this. We have 3 family and consumer science teachers who are retiring. Unless we have 3 other family consumer science teachers in the district that could move into those roles, we may now have a shortage of requirement in a certification area, which may mean that as we look forward, we may have more language arts or social studies or math. Think of our broad certification areas where we have more and we have fewer in FCS. That's going to be our struggle, is to try to balance those so that we're not doing a reduction in force and then in a year having to refill that position after we spend all that time recruiting and inducting that staff. So our secondary is our biggest struggle. 9 is a good number, a better number than it was. Remember when I first brought these to you? We were hoping to get 25 retirees, and we were planning on 25 elementary staff reductions and 25 secondary staff reductions. So we've come a long way moving that down to 19 and 9. We're still hoping that that gets better, but at least for right now, we're in a level that looks attainable. One thing I didn't mention is at the elementary level, we have a 19 staff reduction in the weighted resource allocation model. We have 20 elementary retirees. So that's a good number. The number of vacancies at the elementary level next year due to retirees is 20. If we evaporate 19 positions through the adjustment of the RAM, that means technically there's still 1 elementary opening out there next year. Now, not everybody's in the right seats, because we've had changes in attendance areas, changes in school sizes, so we're going to have a significant displacement this spring. Chase has been working through a schedule with that. We've been meeting regularly with the administrators to let them know how that's going to unfold. But one thing that this does, and in our conversations with ICEA, it allows us to give some level of reassurance to the elementary teachers that there is a space at the table for them. So we feel really good about that. Teacher librarians, again, in the case of not our best options in front of us, we have 3 retirements, and we're literally looking at retirements in every category. And so this is a category that we're looking at where we've got some potential replacement or retirements. And the goal here is, can we meet the needs of the kids in the district by holding those positions vacant this year and rearranging current staff, recognizing that we're going to have to reconsider those as soon as our budget recovers. So Amy's been working to look at that and say, can we make some adjustments at the elementary level? Matt's been looking at the secondary level with that, given where the retirements are at, to figure out how we may be able to redeploy the people on the team in order to cover the student needs as part of that.
Hey Steve, two
Yes.
quick questions. One jumps back up to secondary.
Sure.
At some point, will it be the board that needs to have the discussion, or do you guys have the discussion on what that number is to run a section or to start something new?
Yeah, we'll be back in front of you with that. Again, Matt will be working with the secondary administrators on that. What does that long tail look like? And what are those classes, and what are our best, worst decisions when it comes to determining how to manage that? I'll just give you for instance, if we decide that some classes should be offered every other year, that could be a challenge for you if you're a senior and this is the year that you plan to take that class. So we have to look really closely at what those singletons are that have low enrollment, and look at the impact that that has on a student's course of study as we go about that. Remember, one of the other things that Diane shared with you when we looked at that long tail was there's an offer and teach requirement. So some things that the Department of Ed requires you to offer and teach. We may not get a large subscription for those classes, but we're required to not only have them in the catalog, but to teach them over the course of the year. So we'll be back to you with that as we get a little bit further down the path and we know what those registrations look like.
And then
Well,
Yeah,
on the teacher librarian, do we have any comparison as far as other districts, as far as the number of teacher librarians they have as compared to us? Is that something that?
I don't
that-
have
that
that
we're-
in hand, but I know we can get that.
Okay.
Yeah, we can definitely get that for you.
ISB has everything.
Yeah, I've seen the ISB report, I just don't have it readily at hand.
my second question was sort of on that teacher librarian, and maybe just a comment, I guess, that we may need to cover later, but that Senate Study Bill 1190 that's passing out in a subcommittee today to the Senate, we're going to discuss tomorrow, eliminates the requirement for a lot of these things, and I just want to put on the record for myself, I'm not in favor of a lot of the stuff that's in here, and I know that some of the groups that we are part of have registered in favor of it, so just saying that.
But we still can choose, right? We're not being
Yeah.
mandated to make reductions or whatever.
Yeah.
We just have
What
flexibility. So
what I understand from
He's
that.
saying he opposes that bill.
I understand, but I'm saying that we're not gonna be forced to make changes based on what it passes. We still have.
What I understand from the bill, the genesis from the bill has nothing to do with our larger urban districts. Our small rural districts are struggling to meet the requirement that they have librarians and nurses on staff. They then find themselves out of compliance with the Department of Ed. They're looking for alternative ways to fill that need. Can they use a computer librarian? Can they contract out for somebody who's not certified as a school nurse but might be a registered nurse? It's not our issue. I'm frustrated that they've swept all of us into it because it goes from shall to may, and that causes a lot of concern, and I've heard from a lot of folks. It's Book Madness Week, so I've been out reading in the schools, and I've had conversations with our librarians about it, and I think they're justifiably concerned about it. I would much rather have them have put a bill in place that gave districts that were unable to meet that state requirement some kind of waiver for it, rather than this wholesale change to the way we do business.
You know, the
Local
interesting
control
thing-
instead of one size fits all?
The one thing that was interesting though, when you said that about the smaller district, is Friday when we had legislative thing here, the two, West Branch and Mid Prairie were both saying, we need those positions.
Yeah.
like, they don't want to get rid of that, they need them, so.
And keep in mind, the benefit of being a Solon, a West Branch, a Lone Tree is your proximity to Iowa City, the University of Iowa, et cetera, et cetera. The ones that, when I contacted UEN and SAI and said, where does Bill come from? It comes from along the Missouri border, it comes from along the Minnesota border, where they're literally struggling to get anyone to even apply for the jobs, let alone hire somebody that's got the right certification. Then they're out of compliance and they're dealing with that mess, and I get that. I don't want to make light of that, but it's just unfortunate that that was the solution that was proposed.
Why would the Urban Education Network be in favor of it, though?
I wasn't able to get a response, so I don't know yet.
Doesn't their lobbyist represent both urban and rural?
Yeah, but she would have registered under rural for that if it was rural, so I wasn't able to get a response.
Weird.
So again, and I haven't broken these out, but you're gonna get a little bit more detail in this. We also, you're gonna see in our next iteration, as we try to break out our retirees up here, we've got school counselors that also fit this category, and we're gonna break them out just because we want you to see them. We want you to understand that literally every retirement that's happening, we're looking at it and saying, can that retirement remain vacant for a year to give us room to get through this budget process? So they're our best, worst decisions. That comes down into the next category, and I'm going to take these two together. These are our categorical funds, so Title I and Dropoff Prevention. And both of these funds, in recent years, have had some changes to their formula. So Title I allows you to pay for class size reduction. It also allows you to pay for reading intervention and things like that. Dropout prevention allows you to pay for student success centers, allows you to pay for other programs designed to help our students that need additional assistance. You think IJAG, our workplace learning program. But it also now allows you to pay for counselors, which it didn't before. So the question that we asked in Title I and Dropout Prevention was, can we take those categorical funds and pay for classroom teachers, the core of what we do? Recognizing that the downside to that is if you pay for a classroom teacher with that categorical fund, you now can't support the programs that those categorical funds were paying for in the past. So when we initially brought this to you, we had about $1 million in reductions to dropout prevention. We've reduced that, and part of that's from feedback that we've gotten from the board, down to about $500,000. We've left our Title I right now at about $708,000. So our dropout prevention will help us fund some counselors. Our Title I is going to help us fund some classroom teachers, and we've made modifications to those, especially to the dropout prevention, reducing that reduction by about 50%. So, and maybe Lori, this goes to one of your earlier questions. There's not detail in there yet because that number has been in flux, and so the team has looked at it and said, let's wait till we know what the final number is, so we have a better idea of which programs we're going to look at. That's why you see a lengthy list of programs in both of those categories, because those are what the categorical funds are currently paying for. So that was a relatively quick drive through it. I'll tell you that each week this has felt better. Not good, but it's felt better. We're closing in on the process. We were really nervous. I think you knew this at the beginning, that our early retirement incentive wasn't hitting the mark. We opened it up for another 3 weeks. We exceeded 50, which is a real plus for us, because otherwise we'd have been laying those teachers off. So I think this puts us in a much better position. Our goal is by the time we get to that RIF date, that we've gotten this down to 0 or as close to it as possible. We'll be back in front of you every 2 weeks with an update to this chart, but now every time you see an update to the chart, you'll see 0 on the bottom line, and we will make whatever adjustments we need to up above to hit that mark. One of the things that we've been asking you about, sorry I forgot to mention this, is where are your hard stops? So one of the things you'll notice on this one is attendance support busing is not on here. It was on the last version that you had. Based on feedback that we got from you as a board, we took that off. Part of what the committee that sat on that attendance support bus discussion looked at was, what do we have now? What do we need for next year? Recognizing that we have a fixed pool of money available to us. They went through, they did some prioritization of those routes. So I feel good about where they're at in terms of meeting the needs of our neediest kids, given that allowance that they had to work with. So the question I have for you is the same question I have every time we get together, which is, do you see anything on here that's a hard stop? Because if so, then we'll have to make a modification or adjustment somewhere else inside one of these categories to make sure that we get to zero when we come back in the next couple weeks. And again, we'll continue to refine these numbers every 2 weeks. We'll bring you a new version of it so that by the time that we get to the end of March, we are very comfortable that we have an operational budget that will allow us to balance for next year.
And the same question I asked last time, is doing the foundation help some of these, programs? I know you've got Susan working on some.
Yep, I've got Susan working on that. I got another meeting set up with her on Friday. One of the things that she and I talked about are what are the programs that might be easiest to leverage support from the community in terms of what could they hang their hat on. Two of the programs on here that probably have the most curb appeal, if you will, just because they're recognizable and visible, IJAG and the Workplace Learning Program, so we've talked about those. We're going to talk about those again on Friday. And to Lori's earlier point about where's the additional detail in here, if we can supplement some of those funds for money that the foundation can raise, we can take those off the list, and then that gives us a clearer picture of what we might need to do in order to hit that mark.
Doesn't Susan, so they have to lock in on commitments to raising certain money by, what's our budget submission deadline? I mean,
So two different things. So our budget certification is that process that we go through April 15th that helps us set what our maximum budget is
Yes.
for the next school year. This is our operational budget, how we spend those dollars. And
so we have flexibility after
we have more
15th
flexibility.
to figure out, but I mean,
Yes.
at some point, we'll have to say whether a program's in or out based on.
we have to have a level of confidence that when Craig says
Yeah.
this is the deficit for next year, that the operational budget that we create will erase that deficit. Phil, you had a question?
And I'm sure we're maxing out grants and it's like STEM grants, those types of things, researching and going after money that's out there. I know other area FFA programs and ag education have started, have been getting some STEM grants and things like that. We're looking at
Yeah,
every opportunity there.
We're pretty aggressive at looking for those grants. The biggest part of the problem for us is most of those grants cover program costs and not personnel costs.
Sure.
So, yeah, we still continue to look for those because those augment our programs and potentially release general fund dollars that then make those available for staff. All right.
So this is a smaller dollar amount, but the $150,000, that's the $10 per pupil reduction in
Oh.
supplies, is going to hit some of our schools really, really hard. They already ask parents to bring supplies in, and already the teachers are putting a lot of their own money into their classrooms. So is there a way that we could mitigate that reduction so that it's not felt more, more heavily by the schools that don't have parents that, or don't have as many resources to have people kind of, fill in that gap?
One of the things that we've done is the foundation actually provides some assistance for us in the buildings that have the greatest needs so that they provide some supplementary funding for them. We can certainly go back and look at how that balance is. We've traditionally done it on a per pupil basis because it covers costs that would be incurred on a per pupil basis regardless of the need of the child. And so we haven't done that. Our per pupil allocation hasn't been on a weighted resource allocation model. We can certainly go back and run it through a formula and see what it looks like.
I'd like to
Well,
see that,
yeah.
and including the, pull in the data we have from what the foundation does, so we,
I mean, let's just say, for example, on my child's supply list, it says bring 2 reams of paper.
Sure.
So I'm sure not every child is showing up with 2 reams of paper at my kid's school. And at another school, they might have, 75%
Sure.
of the kids showing up with 2 reams of
We
paper.
could
Well,
use
that
our
school,
RAM model as
Yeah.
a
RAM model.
filter for
And,
it. Yeah.
and to your point, I had a community member come to me, and I thought it was a great idea, was a Craigslist for the district, where you have a school that has 60 extra reams of paper that they put on there, on this, for a school that may not have that. And tonight in accounts payable, somebody bought whisk brooms off of Amazon. Well, we sold 100 brand-new whisk brooms in a box for $11 at 11 cents a piece a couple months ago. Craig and I talked about it. And if we've got some type of a marketplace that staff can go to and look at, I think that there's some potential and some opportunities there.
The only
And
thing I
also-
would add to that is that I think every school is gonna say, we need all of
Sure,
our
well,
reads of paper.
and what this person said too, is if you open it up to the community
Yeah, the community.
to say, we have a need for this.
Mhm.
Well, you would spur some volunteerism from some people that say, oh, well, maybe somebody at Copyworks or Staples or someone else says, we've got a great deal on this. This is good PR for us. What if we give that to the schools? I don't know that it costs us that much to try that.
Yeah.
But we have a very giving community and things like that, and especially if it's something they can identify to a school, we might be surprised.
I just want to be sure our teachers aren't the ones that absorb that.
Sure. No,
Because we
I
know
think
that
it's
they
fair enough.
put a tremendous amount into their classrooms already.
that's a pretty straightforward process for us. We've already got the RAM model in place for us to put per pupil allocation and just run the formula through it.
That's a hard stop, but I'm probably most concerned about the dropout prevention, student family advocates, the academic and behavioral support. I just think if you pull that, you immediately make everybody's job harder, and we will absolutely lose a given number of kids.
Yeah. And that's to be honest with you, and sitting down with Amy and Matt and really looking at this as we're sharpening our pencil on it, that's one of the reasons why is we were able to generate some additional flex in the model in other areas. We reduced this from $1 million to $500,000. And we would like to continue to reduce that further. So hopefully when we come back to you in subsequent iterations of this, that number's not small. Because I heard that last time, you guys are pretty.
Yeah, and figuring out a way, I mean, how we can't keep everything, obviously, and we always want to be more efficient, but finding ways so that we don't lose those supports, even if we have to modify how we do that.
Another question. So on the very top item, the ESC restructuring and that, so this is personnel costs, but are there, I'm wondering if the ESC staff could go through an exercise perhaps and talk amongst themselves of ways that there could be a higher number cut there, not necessarily in staff, but I don't know if people could be creative about how things could be done differently.
Sure.
To try and, I'd like to see, no offense, but I'd like to see that number higher and some of these numbers lower, because that's further from the classroom and further from the high risk. High.
Here's a question. I know we spend a ton on paper. I mean, if we required people to do double-sided printing.
It's already the default.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to manually go in and try to reset.
Kim prints double-sided all the time.
But, even things like paying dues for things.
Right, well,
paying,
license.
education.
Yes.
Conference funds, things like that, I don't know. I'm just saying if people could come together and say, what else could we do?
Sure.
So that we could bear more of this.
If we look at, yeah, right, and I know where you're going, Lori, and our, licensure that we pay for staff. It's, if it was across the board and everyone took it, it would be, and it's, for some, it's $500, right? For licensure a year on a six-figure salary, it's easier than a teacher who has to pay for their licensure on a less than that salary.
I think we all pay our
Yeah, we don't
$85
pay.
for.
Well, no, but I
licensing.
know administrate, there's some,
Dues to different.
they're different groups, but
Different
it's.
certifications.
There's it's escaping me right now, but I see it every year going through on the bills, and it's anywhere from 500 to 750 depending on the
We
administration.
can definitely do that. I know, I'll just share with you, one of the things that we really focused on this time, and we know that 84 cents out of every dollar goes to somebody in the district. If you were around and you were with us when we went through the budget reductions in 2013, we made some program decisions that were pretty tough on the community as we went through that process. The yield was pretty low on that on a per program basis, and so we had a long conversation at the admin council level with the discussion about we're really gonna connect with the bottom line here if we really look at how our staff are allocated. So we'll definitely go back and continue to look at those because I think they're good, and I think that's one of the things you see at the very bottom here is we're still continuing to try to evaporate as many contracts as we
Right.
have
Well,
as they expire. So we'll keep doing that because those are all really good points.
And those are, we have incentives for our employees and we want to reward them, but, if you're saying we gotta buckle down for a couple of years, but
Absolutely.
as the budget restores, these are things we
Sure.
think are valuable.
Yep, I agree with that.
I mean, double-sided printing, I think, is forever, but,
You have to be very astute now to be able to not print double-sided.
The one thing I would say, and I understand in this conversation, spending time with the board, when you refer to the ESC and central office, who you're talking about. But the vast majority of the people that work at the ESC are not making six-figure salaries, as Phil says. We're talking about folks that are making the $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, less than a lot of the people in our buildings. And that sends a message here as well, that because they're not in a school building, their work's not important. And I would hate for that to be the unintended piece of that, because it's not just the administrators that we're talking about working. There's a lot of people that are working very hard day in, day out on the support side to make the organization run. It might not be in the classroom, but without those folks, things wouldn't get to the schools. We wouldn't hire teachers, we wouldn't get our financial services done. And so I want to keep that in mind, that there are a lot of different aspects that people that have to work, and we use these broad categories. We understand the conversation, but not everybody else understands what we're talking about. But sorry, I have to support the folks that I know are working hard.
It's a valid point you're making and everything, but the employees you're talking about don't have the $750 license renewals every annual either. But
You're right, but they work
your
260
point-
days a year in the summer, every day to make the district go.
Your point is well taken and well made.
So then I just want to share this with you because I know we got a couple other items on the
Okay, can I
agenda.
jump in?
Yep, go ahead. Sorry.
It's hard for me to wrap my head around what 9 people at the secondary level means. Like, that seems like a small number scattered across, it's hard for me to figure out what that means. The 19 at the elementary, well, our class sizes, in my opinion, are too big as it is. We all, I think, would all agree on that, but you're talking roughly 8 person at each school, give or take, which would increase class sizes maybe a little bit, maybe not, because there's some inefficiencies as we look at RAM and where there's some tipping points. So those numbers are, I think, in my head, seem fairly reasonable. The ones that I think have bigger reaching impact, the 3 teacher librarian thing, positions, as well as the junior high AD, and JP's right, Jeff does a lot, right? And for those positions, those 4 that are on there, and some of the other stuff in the title and drop-off prevention say, we'll cover that with some other people, I think does a disservice to what those people have done. And to me, that's, I think they have a broader reaching more than maybe a class size goes up by 1, right? So that's where I would start to look if we have magic pots of money falling
And that's
out of the sky,
exactly
that's
why
where I
we're
would start
here.
to look at.
That's why we're here, because when we said, how does our funnel work? The first screen that we put in was classroom teachers. So those are the ones that we kept. And then we started looking below that, and that's why you see, whether it's a middle school AD, or librarians, or our reading support teachers, or our dropout prevention staff. So that's why we need this feedback from you, because when we said the first thing that we want to do is preserve the teachers in the classroom, that by default meant then we have to find those reductions somewhere else in the system. So that's, again, that's why we want to have this dialogue with you every couple of weeks, so by the time we get to March 26th, we're all really tight together on this, because if you're looking at it saying, ooh, you know what, that middle school, that junior high AD, we ought to be filling that position. Well, that's okay, then we, just like support, or attendance support busing, we can pull that out. We'll have to find it somewhere else in the system, but understanding your priorities will guide us to making final decisions here. And you may not have that today, and that's okay, because a lot of the interaction with you in between sessions is what's guided our conversation. That's why attendance support busing went away from conversations that we had. It's why we focused so heavily on cutting that dropout prevention dollar down. So if you see things on here and you're comfortable seeing something about it tonight, that's great. If you think of something on Thursday, please let us know, because that's going to guide us as we come back in 2 weeks.
Well, in that vein, I will say Title I teachers, with our reading assessment scores as they are, I mean, it doesn't fit with our board goals to see a cut in that area. So that's hard. That's a hard one for me to see.
I mean, I just had that conversation, and the question was, the question that we posed to ourselves, and we did not have an answer for it, I'll give you that, was if there are additional dollars available that would allow us to reduce that RAM number from 19 to, pick a number, 16, 15, 14, should that RAM number be reduced? And should those teachers, Sean, to your question, should they go back into the classroom? Or should those dollars go into replacing those reading assistance teachers that we have out there? Amy and I didn't have an answer for it, but we were having that hypothetical conversation about how to balance it out. That's how we got to the decision about should those dollars go back into the classroom or should they go into dropout prevention? It was conversation not only with you, but JP, to your point, building principals who are coming to us and saying, if I had to make a choice, which I don't want to, I would like you to make the choice, but if I had to make a choice, I would like to see some more support here. If I had the right retirement so that I wasn't laying someone off, I'd be willing to trade that over here. So that's part of that dialogue that we're working on, and Lori, we can definitely take that into consideration as hopefully, because each 2 weeks we've had a little bit more flexibility with this.
Well, that just, that impacts everything with all of our outcomes that we're trying to improve.
Yep.
That's at the heart of what we do
Yep.
in turning our students out, and those kids that aren't getting those skills, they're not, our district outcomes are not, we're going to see it there, I'm afraid.
So again, I know you guys are on a timeline, you got some other things to do, I just want to, can I really quickly, Janet,
Please.
can I show you this? Okay. So if we make the reductions to the RAM, we're going to talk about those so that I want it to be visible, that's why we've got it on the agenda at the next board meeting, because we want to have it up at the table. So we have our kindergarten registration coming up. So right now for us, that's an unknown number, so I would just tell you that right now, as you look at the kindergarten cohort, surprisingly, it looks exactly to a person the size of the first grade cohort, because we simply duplicated that as part of this model. But you can see the reduction in 19 in here. You can see the grade levels that those students or those positions are lost. You can see the change in the overall pupil-teacher ratio of the district of 20.9 to 22.5. You could argue that number both ways in terms of its significance. I'll tell you that that does cause us concern when we look at that. Without going through this in significant detail, because I know you're going to see it next week, I just want to share a couple things with you. We're trying to better understand where our schools are at, and so we share 5 different indicators for you in each category. The number of students who are low socioeconomic status, the number of percentage of students that are English language learners, the percentage that participate in special education. If they have an ESSA designation, you see that on here, and what was last year's report card. So this year's report card won't come out for about another 3 or 4 weeks, but this shows you what last year's report card score looks like. If you look at this on a building by building basis, the numbers don't look the same perhaps as they do when you aggregate it. So for instance, at Hills, you see that overall they were 14.5 to 1 last year, and this year they'd be at 15.3 to 1. So is there some change? Yes. Is it dramatic? Not necessarily. And so you see that as you move through here. You can see Kirkwood, 17.6, they go up to 19.6, so there's a little bit of a change there. Obviously, the demographic changes a little bit, and the schools being right-sized, so these were things that we took into consideration as we looked at this. So without going through it on a school-by-school basis, I would definitely encourage you to take a look at that and bring your questions in when we come to the next board meeting. But essentially what we did, so that you understand this, is there aren't any schools in RAM 1 this year. So you see RAM 1 is just a placeholder. So our RAM 1 schools moved into RAM 2. We created a new level in RAM 3. This was between the old 1 and 2. And then we have RAM 3, or RAM 4 rather, which is the old RAM 3. And then there's a RAM 5 down at the bottom. So you can see the changes to that. This is all conditionally formatted, so you can see that those that are greener at the top have numbers that are create lower needs overall for the school, not in individual classrooms. The numbers that tilt more towards the red end of the spectrum have a higher level of need per school. So we use the same process that we used before, made some adjustments to the formula, added an additional couple layers in there. That's how we get the efficiencies and generate the savings. And again, it just happens to align at this point in time. We've got 20 elementary retirees, and this creates 19 vacancies in the system. So again, we'll bring this back next week. We update this every week for the elementary principals so that they can track through it as they look at potential changes in their staffing. So as we get closer to our final registration process, and as Amy and her team get the voluntary transfers process, this number will get tighter and tighter for us as we move through the month of March. It does a lot of information. If you've got questions or comments on it, things that come up for you in the next couple of weeks, please let me know before we get to the next board meeting. I'll try to push answers out to the group as a whole, and then if there are things that we need to discuss as a group when we get back together on Tuesday, the 26th, or the 12th, or sorry, it's the 26th today. Hopefully that'll help us get a little bit closer towards our end result. Awesome, thank you.
It's
What's
hard.
that?
Thanks for continuing to look at the details, and it's hard work. It's so hard. It's a real burden. The next topic is on facilities, and I'm not sure these bullet points 1 and 2 are completely reflective of what we were trying to accomplish with this agenda item. I think it was around the future, next round of the F&P and what are our driving principles for consideration for this next round of work. We have a lot of different ideas put on the table around needs for F&P. There's the facilities assessment, which is something I think we do on a regular basis, yes? We've got we've got a parking lot of things that we've been collecting up for, since this existing F&P is in place. We've talked about some ideas around preschool centers. We've talked around ideas of pairing and magnet schools. These would kind of fall into that potential area of F&P. We've talked about, are there some efficiencies to be gained if we have a 5 through 8, no, I'm not saying like 6 through 8 school, K through 5, 6, 7, 8, and then high school, what might that look like from an F&P standpoint? But I think if I'm reading correctly where we landed from our work session, our retreat, that before we got into those specific discussion areas, we wanted to develop some kind of guiding principles, objectives for what this next F&P process would focus on.
Well, I'll start just because I know the middle school topic kind of came out of left field in a very public way. I had, before the winter break, I had brought it up with superintendent in our just kind of one-on-one meetings as something I would like to throw out on the table as we came back, as knowing we were coming back at the first year to revisit is school pairing something we would want to do, and how we move forward with that. And the preschool stuff kind of fits into there as kind of some long-term thoughts. And I wanted to throw a middle school idea out there for a lot of reasons. I don't know that we need to go exhaustive into it now, because I think what we're trying to get out of things is the important part. So at our retreat, as we were discussing, we needed to figure out what those next chunks are at the end of our plan, right? There's a lot of pieces in there that fit into the different buckets of we're doing that for equity, or we're doing it for financial savings, or we're doing it for educational programming, or all of the above in one case and 2 out of the 3 in another case, or whatever it is. And I think it was important to, as we put those pieces together, to identify what each piece might do, whether it's 1 thing, 2 things, 3 things, or however many buckets we want to create. And then, you know, have that discussion on what the priorities are. And in the end, right, everything's a priority, right? We want to do all of those things. We have to be fiscally responsible, and we want to have equity, and we want to have the best educational program we can, right? So it's hard to prioritize one over the other, but I think that's something we will have to do at some point when we're going to start to plan out, this is going to happen, and then this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. We've got to put some sort of priority on it, and I think identifying what some of those broader buckets are will start that process. Because I think it's got to start wherever we can. Right? So I think that's where I was coming from, and I'll tell you all my reasons why I think the middle school is a great idea. At some point in the future, I don't know that this is the right time for that, but I think it would fit in a lot of the buckets in my head. So.
But it's in those guiding principles, what are we trying to accomplish? The last FMP, I mean, we needed air conditioning, we needed elevators, we needed capacity. There was some very basic things that we're trying to accomplish, and that this round of work is different. So what are those priorities that we're trying to get after?
I guess I'd like to just start where I'm coming from on this. I think that we looked at our district. This is a bad example because it's not a full box, but here's the box. And we've only done stuff in the box. Boundaries, buildings, right? That's all we've really talked about, not necessarily philosophy or future. And so, like, I think it's time for us to look outside this box now, because we've set some boundaries. They may not be great, perfect, where we want it. We've had some other discussions where maybe we could do some sister schools or magnet schools or whatever it is. But I think that's just touching on those boundaries again every time and changing it. I think it's time that we have a discussion about what we want the future of our district to look like and plan it around that. Like, you bring up the vision statement a lot. What is that?
Or philosophy from the policy discussion tonight, I mean, I think those things
But I
should
think
be
they'll
our
all
guide star.
They'll all tie into that. I think
Yeah.
if we had some discussions, the community members have weighed in on it too, to a point. Sean brought up the middle school idea. I threw that out there in a social way and got some responses back. And there's people out there saying, what about magnet middle school instead? What about thinking outside the box of not just having feeder schools, but having that's the choice where you go, and then you go from there. So I think we have 3 high schools. We have 4 high schools. We have 3 current, junior highs. We have enough space right now in the elementaries. It's like, I think it's time we've got the buildings. Let's look at the vision.
Yeah, I'm on board with that too, just like that.
Well, we had a very big BLD discussion for this phase we're in right now and have not yet to complete. And it was there was time and there was discussion on middle schools.
Right.
And it didn't go anywhere.
Well, I'll let you finish, then I'll come back to it.
Of course. You can come back many times. But it didn't. And we have predicated what we're doing now on a K-6, 7, 8 high school system. Not to say it can't be changed, of course it can be. But everything was designed, allocated, appropriated, timelined out for that model. We haven't completed that model. We were doing a lot of things, making schools equitable, educational equity, big thing. And I think it's important for us to show some stability to the community instead of constant, okay, what's the flavor of the month? type of a thing. I'm very interested in the discussion on pairing and magnets. That's one we've already started, that discussion. And there are some operational efficiencies there. There's some efficiencies from just having smaller schools. It kind of is a savior for smaller schools, pairing. But myself, I think that we're getting, not that we can't discuss the future and everything that way, and believe me, I would like to have some serious discussions on curriculum and parent engagement and getting business involved in apprenticeships and those types of things, and making sure that we have students on a path, a successful path, when they leave our buildings. And I really feel that's a strong focus for us. And but I just think that at this point, in my opinion, is that we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves until we finish what we've been entrusted with the community to do. Not that we can't discuss it as a long-range thing, but I think we got to concentrate on the nuts and bolts of making sure that we can maintain the staff and standard of excellence that we have and our community expects, and the curriculum and the choices and the pathways for our students going forward.
So just to touch on that 2013 decision, I think, my personal thought, is at that time, people were still looking to have a building that was like the new building that was being built. So their mind was in that was the focus. I want my school to be like that new school out there. I want a new school on the east side of town for the first time in 40 years versus, just grow from the north. So I think to bring in the middle school discussion at that time was not really the focus of that 2013, that's just my opinion. And then I just follow it up with saying that this is the type of discussion you have to set the future before the future comes, because now we're already behind. How many districts do you think, Matt or Steve, that are similar to our size in the state use a 7-8 model?
Very few.
Yeah.
So we're just kind of behind, I would say, in the times there. Is that, that's the shift, the future?
Yeah, I think 7-8's limited. I mean, you might even see more 7-9, or of course 6-8 with middle school, some of those things. I think you see 7-8 more when it's a campus that almost houses a 7-12, a smaller district, and you have a junior high, and then you have a high school, and maybe you're all on one campus type of thing, but, yeah.
Yeah, I guess I see that discussion just dovetailing in with the same stuff Phil's talking about. I think it's all part of the same thing. It all, why do we have a 7-8 model? What does that do for our kids? What does it prepare them for? And how can we do something that gets them on a path? And it is, this FMP is going to be up in 2021. I assume we'd want to do something out to 2031. So that's some, at least beginning a discussion to start that kind of long-range planning. I think all of these, I do think we have to think outside the box. We have to, set down that vision and not just have 7-8 because we've had it forever. And what is the point? And I think that touches on curriculum and career pathways.
I feel like the FMP discussion that was had in 2013, if we're looking to repeat that process, is a different process than what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
We're talking about board discussion. That's a community discussion. I personally feel like our community's not ready for that discussion. We just had a really big effort with boundaries. I'm not saying when it is, because I don't know, but we just...
Why do you say they're not ready for it?
Because we just spent a lot of time on boundaries. We're doing a lot of work with budget. We're moving a lot of kids next year.
Yeah, I don't think any of this is happening anytime soon. I think this is laying the groundwork of a vision to cover what we want our district to be in terms of serving our students, right, and our community. And so grounding in the vision then will help us figure out priorities, Sean, to your earlier point, and then based on those priorities, what are some actions that we can take 4 or 5 years from now? I mean, some of these things are further out there. We're not shifting to 6 through 8 next year.
Right.
I mean,
No, yeah, and
We
I,
told people that we were gonna restart in earnest after the holidays with the school pairing
well,
discussion
that's,
specifically.
but that we did
right?
promise.
Yeah,
That's
but
different.
that-
Yeah.
But
And
actually,
it's not different,
It's
right?
not, I
It's the
agree.
exact same thing, right? This is a possibility that we would look at. Maybe middle school, maybe magnet schools, maybe preschool, so these are all possibilities. And I think we need to have those discussions over a long time frame, because that's what got people really concerned in the fall when we started talking about school pairings, because they were freaking out that it was happening so fast.
and oh, by the
We
way.
can't wait to
Yeah.
throw out there, if I throw out a middle school and I give you all of the reasons why I think it's great, and you all come back to me and say, you're wrong, that's fine, we had the discussion, but I don't think that's a one-time deal. I think it's scattered over the next, year and a half, 2 years of having discussions of all of the different things that may or may not help us move forward
Yeah.
to whatever the goal is that we're trying to get to, which is better student outcomes, right?
I think we're saying the same thing, Sean.
I think we
I
are.
think we
I
are.
just don't think
I
we
think
wait to start it.
I feel like we promised we were gonna talk about pairings. So if we've changed that, we need to be clear
But I
that
think
we've
that
changed.
falls into the discussion. It's just a part of that discussion.
Well, I am not sure that everybody feels like that falls into
I
the
know,
same
well,
discussion.
everybody, I don't
so.
think everybody feels like they're tired or not ready for a discussion about what we're talking about just because we went through boundaries. I think people, my personal opinion, I think people are tired of talking about boundaries. They want to talk about the educational piece of it.
I think a couple points that whatever is happening, it's over a long period of time. Something like paired schools, I think is, one, we made the promise, and two, it's something that we're gonna have to try. And we're gonna have to pilot it, before and that should happen sooner than later, because we gotta see if it works. But all of these things, I think, are long-term plan. And this FMP is not gonna be, I can't imagine it's gonna be the magnitude of the last one, right? We were making up for how many decades of neglect, building schools, I don't see this next FMP as being that big. So I think there would be time for this vision discussion, educating ourselves about these different topics as we move forward. At the same time as, maybe making some deeper dive on some more specific things like paired schools.
But I sure would like to have that vision in hand.
I think,
To
yeah.
contextualize the pairing conversation. And I agree, we did commit to doing it. We also said there's nothing that's gonna happen in fall of 19, and the earliest it could happen is fall of 20. And I actually agreed with something Phil said around some stability for a bit, to let the new boundaries settle in for folks and get used to that. And then while we're doing our longer term work around vision, contextualize there, and then prioritizing what do we want to queue up first? Maybe we want to queue up a paired school first in 2021 or 22, I don't know. Or maybe it's a magnet school, or maybe it's a pilot of a 6 through 8 school. But it's hard for me to have those conversations without the vision in mind. What are we trying to accomplish based on student outcomes? We've had community members wanting innovation in our schools. What does that mean? Is it an I'm big kind of thing? I mean, we've got all kinds of inputs from all different perspectives. I think it's our job to make sure we've got an agreed upon robust vision that we can share, that we can get community input on, get people to buy into. Then we can start taking things off from a planning and budgeting and a standpoint. But it's why Steve, we had asked for the superintendent's vision. It's why I harped on, not harped, but brought up.
I thought it was our vision.
philosophy.
I thought it was our vision.
Yeah, but you want
It
to
is.
draft
I
it.
bet you did,
It is.
but I feel like, I feel like you're a superintendent, man.
Oh,
And you know this is your,
yeah.
I don't, anyway, yes. I think we can start with something
Right.
there, and then we will help craft it with you.
On my list. I'm working on budget first.
Yeah, got a long list.
But I think that's important, and I lost my train of thought, sorry. The look on your face. Made me lose my thought.
Yeah, and I think, we said we'd talk about school pairing, we're talking about it in the context of a vision, and I think we just move those things along and I don't, not from being tired, but I don't think it necessitates the heavy lift of the 6 months of boundaries,
No.
because it's not that
Right.
detailed at this point. It's big picture, And then eventually it'll get down to some detailed things, but hopefully it's things like pilots that aren't going out to every corner of the district and soliciting all this input. It's
Right.
a really targeted area. Or, we want to pilot a magnet that's a very targeted thing, and we can talk to that community as we have our vision and keep.
So it sounds like maybe the first step for us as a board is being committed to doing the heavy lifting of creating a vision. I think we've been talking about having a shared vision for quite some time, and it's sounding more and more like maybe there's a retreat, just solely vision. I mean, we have to have that if we're serious about moving forward and laying out the roadmap to get to some of what we've discussed, and that does include paired schools.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know, I think that's something we should, I mean, maybe each of us jots down our ideas of things that need to be included in the vision statement. I've got my laundry list of things, I'm happy to share them with the board and with Steve. Maybe each of us kind of jot down the things that we think are important, it's from a vision perspective, and share with Steve, so you're not just,
Spitballing.
It's a collaborative process
down
that,
tape.
I think taking a crack at it would be great. And I don't know the timing, I know there's so many priorities going on right now, and when I do a retreat on it, but I agree with you too. We tried it with Harry, when was that, a year or so ago?
Mhm.
For sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
I thought
Yep.
that was,
And so maybe,
that
maybe
laid the
we,
groundwork for a while.
yeah, maybe we
You pull that back out.
do something like that and
Yeah.
like but it's.
Then remember, Harry says you're only allowed 3 things.
Yeah.
I
Not
know,
that good compared to the 15 that are in our current mission statement.
right?
There's more than that when you look at the bullets below it.
Impossible. It's just like this block of stuff.
Oh.
I mean, it's not bad, but it's not actionable. So am I hearing consensus around a retreat on this?
I love retreats.
And then what kind of time frame?
After.
Craig's laughing.
How long do we have you, Craig? Not-
Oh, please do it after I retire.
Craig's going to
No, I
suggest
think
August,
no, I
right?
think we definitely have it when Craig is around.
This is a mic drop moment for you. No, man. Check out that.
I mean, I feel a little bit of a sense of urgency because of the promise around magnet and
Yeah.
pairing discussions
But I mean,
and
that's,
and the Hills conversation, and we did promise to get
Yeah,
back to
that's-
them.
Right.
yeah, but then you're also gonna have a recommendation coming from the preschool committee, and all those things go together.
Yeah.
I mean, if we take them individually,
I agree with you, that this should be a
Crazy.
holistic view, I completely agree. When's the preschool committee?
May.
May.
The plan, and I don't know if the education committee is still meeting, but the plan was that they were going to present that at the education committee meeting in May, which is a year after we originally talked about it last year. If the education committee is still meeting.
We aren't this month or next month, but we are in April.
But I,
Yep.
but
April and May.
May feels kind of far to me, I mean, or maybe we try to do something in
That's
April.
what I think.
Because I think we've got a directional
We
sense
have a
of where the
direction,
preschool committee is
it's just the
going.
details.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so maybe we look at sort of
Something
the April timeframe and,
Right.
we request, we want to share ideas with Steve, but I'm gonna leave it to you as our fearless leader, whose life's work is running and leading school districts to craft this.
You're really working that one over there.
So, we'll set, maybe we can do a doodle poll, Kim, and check out the dates in April and see what we might come up with at the retreat. I think that's good.
that'll give,
What was that?
I said your economics major.
Yeah, it's such a good spreadsheet.
There you go.
huh?
It'll come in a spreadsheet. You'll be all set. Matt and Amy love those.
He's not
He's
kidding.
gonna think
He
outside the
will.
box for a vision statement and present it as a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Craig, you can do anything in a spreadsheet, right?
Forced choice.
Okay, that's great. So we'll do a doodle poll on retreat.
April dates.
It'll be focused on vision. Maybe do we want Harry to come and help or no?
We could certainly reach out to him
I,
and put that on the list.
No.
I would start
With
the
us.
first one with us.
Okay.
Fair enough.
Okay, don't reach out to him.
Okay, I'm moving us to the next topic, which is Pearl. Is it? I don't have my agenda.
It is.
Election day.
Yep.
Special it is.
It's up there.
Oh, thank you.
I'm gonna
So.
pull that up for you.
what do
I'm gonna make the recommendation really simple. I've had a lot of conversations with our fearless auditor, who has informed me that with the new configuration of elections in the state, that the one thing that the district never wants to have is a special election.
Okay.
Because special elections are going to be exceedingly expensive because now they cross municipal lines. You have to have multiple ballots prepared. To put it mildly, it's a mess.
Yeah.
So if you would like to have something on a ballot, you should put it on a regularly scheduled ballot. So if you look at the regularly scheduled ballot, that would be November.
I think that,
What are your thoughts, Craig? Because at one point you had said, we knew it would be expensive, but we thought it had a greater chance of passing. I mean, that was what I remember you saying. Tell me.
Yeah, I don't think I've changed my mind on that. It's probably your most, well, if I put on my CFO hat, of course, it's
That's
the
the
most
one.
reasonable one, right? It also gives you the right amount of planning time to put forward your message. It does have other encumbrances, however, it'll have a much higher turnout and for various reasons, right? So it has to be weighed in that way. But it seems like logically, given the information that we were provided.
This November?
Well,
A November.
May November, okay.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean necessarily this November, I meant A November. I'd be all right with this November, it'd be a lot of work, but
okay.
A
That's what-
November.
That's what the realistic,
yeah.
so we would wait, we could do it in an even year though, right? We
Yeah.
wouldn't have to do it.
There'll be an election in the even year. There'll be city councilors. So.
Well, the next one after this is 2020, which is probably gonna have a very high turnout.
21.
21.
So if we did it on an even year.
Right, I mean, if we did it on an even year, it would have a high turnout.
Right.
General election reasons.
Yeah.
City council's on the same.
So are we saying
Well, it's
that
right there
if
on
we
the
don't
same
do it
cycle
this
as we are. I was
November,
thinking
you
they
do it
were on that
in
off cycle.
That's why
That's the next one.
Oh, that's,
Right.
it has to be on the local.
Right.
Right.
Got it.
Yeah, it wouldn't be on the.
You don't have to decide today. You just need to know that.
It's been a long time.
In November.
Yeah. Travis is really concerned, just so you know, I know I was giving him a hard time about it, but he's really concerned about the complexity of elections now because they will literally have to be preparing separate ballots for each jurisdiction because at any given polling site, you might have this municipal jurisdiction, but that's school district. So he's really concerned about, especially this next round of elections, and getting the right people, the right ballots at the right polling places.
With no guidance from the state on a uniform way to do that, so every county.
And it's not something discussed tonight, but save if we need to do another
Revenue purpose
statement vote,
Yeah.
that's something to factor in.
Yep.
If you want to bond against it, the current legislation would say you need to do another revenue purpose statement.
So then I think we have to weigh, do we want those on the same ballot?
Yep,
Right.
yeah, yep, that's a good point.
Excellent. And by the way,
Give us more money.
And more money.
Since you're opening your wallets, give us more.
But, I mean, what are your thoughts?
That's what the current legislation would suggest.
Yeah.
And you probably-
I mean, what are your thoughts about putting it on the same ballot?
Oh, Pearl and the revenue purpose statement?
You can get back to us.
It's how compelling our,
Yeah.
Yeah. We're asking for different things.
They do, they're different things. You know, the Pearl is a really highly under-leveraged funding option that's available to Iowa schools. You've seen more and more school districts taking a look at it, and I think you have every right to engage the public in that conversation. I think it can really do some great things for before and after school and things like that.
And our playgrounds
The
too.
revenue purpose statement has already shown itself to be highly advantageous to the community. I think if you did it in such a time frame where you could look back and say, you see what we accomplished the last time we did this, let's do it all together again. That would be my message. And so I would probably wait until we've matured this facility master plan to the point where you can tell the public, see our successes and see all the things we've done.
Pearl first.
Yep, and then do the Pearl first, and then I would do the state.
So on 2
'Cause you're
separate
not-
ballots.
Yeah, because you're not gonna have really access to SAVE, the second funding round of SAVE until about 2023 anyway. And so there's no immediate rush to do that. And I'd finish your facility master plan, be planning for the next 10 years in another 24 months, get serious about that, and then make that happen. But in the meantime, I think Pearl could really be something that could be highly beneficial to our school district and community partnerships.
And I think we, to Craig's point, I think we've got a compelling story with the work of the playground committee
Yeah.
and their recommendations. And I think that's a compelling message that's universal across the district. And so from that standpoint, I think when we go out there and start saying, why Pearl, I think we have a very compelling rationale for it.
So, forgive me, because I'm late, it's late here, I'm having trouble. So what date are we talking about for Pearl?
It's like 2021,
It would either be.
November 2021?
19 or 21.
or this year.
I still know the level of effort to get something ready for the ballot in 19. I feel like we're already behind, but that's a naive view, an uneducated view.
No, not necessarily. I mean, we ramped up. We've been very deliberate in the past about going forward, and so we've started like a year out. That's been our usual MO, or sometimes a little bit further.
I mean,
You know,
yeah.
And if it's 50% plus one, it's not like a bond.
Yeah.
I'm
And it's-
shocked.
And while it's a new tax, there's an extremely compelling, we've already done a lot of legwork. We had a committee like 3-4 years ago that vetted this whole process,
Yep.
provided a report to the board, and shared that with you before, and all those kind of things. And so, and it's 13 cents.
yeah.
Honestly, in the budget world, 13 cents comes and goes pretty quickly on our tax rate. And even though it is a new tax, it's not an overbearing piece that I don't think would be a hard message to overcome, actually.
For this November?
I don't have to carry the water on that.
Well, but you can do the foundational
Right, we
work.
would.
This is an easy one for you to make, right? You're not gonna be around to do
Why
it.
not?
Sure. go
I'll
ahead.
still be here paying taxes.
Well, so what about that 13 cents now, Craig?
Yeah.
I'm pushing the issue, because if we are trying for November, boy, we
No,
got
I personally
gotta get-
myself, I think that we'd be going, I think that we have to hold off on that. Just my own take on it.
Well, this is helpful. We've got some options in front of us. Thank you. That was really helpful insight and understand the process and timing. And so I think we've done as much as we can tonight. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Wait, before you adjourn,
Yes.
so if we did decide to do it for this 19, what would be when would you need a decision by?
I think it's
Uh,
less of when, I mean, we have to start now, but it's who.
Yeah.
Who would
So keep in mind, I'll just give you the 30 seconds because I know we're running out of time here. So this is a campaign that is going to be in full swing from September to November because people are not going to be paying attention to it in the summer. So when do we need to know? Well, we've got to get all the stuff, we got to get all of our ducks in a row in terms of the procedural parts of it. But really, if this is going to pass in November, you need the spring to organize a committee that works over the summer, that comes out like a shot out of a cannon in
Chairman
September.
of this committee.
No, I understand how that all
Yeah.
works, trust
I
me.
know.
Yeah.
It's just, it's finding the people to do it, the time
I
to do it.
Yeah.
understand that as well, I
So-
just want to know when it would have to be because.
So we would need to know to get all the procedural stuff done this spring. That, I'll give you that
Work
enormous.
to Get this passed, do the nomination process and all that, it would take you about 90 days to
Yeah.
work through that. To
Yeah.
get the ballot signatures and the things you would need. You could do it in that amount of time
Yeah.
if you wanted.
If we knew about it so that we could get that work done, so that when people left for the summer, they knew that we were gonna come back and have a vote on it, even if we're not actively campaigning. We got a passive campaign going over the summer, and then an active campaign starting in September. So from that standpoint, we wanna know by 1st of April, you know, so that you think about 1st of May, 1st of June, 1st of July.
Not take it off the table.
Yeah.
And think about who we know who could like run the campaign.
I'm not worried about that part of it, I just want to know that nuts and bolts.
If we knew by the 1st of April, we'd be able to advertise to people over the summer in a passive campaign that we were moving forward with. People would know because they'd see us at the board meeting going through those procedural steps. It would be picked up in the newspaper so that it would be common knowledge among our parents and the community as we sail into the end of the school year. We can finish the last few procedural steps as we move into June, but then we're ready to go in August.
I think you'd really want to try to time it so that you could do some of those ballot signatures while parents were still engaged in the school year at the end of May-ish.
Yeah.
Okay, and so you would probably want to make a decision in March sometime,
Yeah.
whether or not you want to move forward with this so that we can begin that process in April.
Do we want to put it on another work session, just to kind of talk through the,
We can add that to the next work session.
just to kind of keep.
We can add that to the next work session.
And I could get the steps mapped out for
That'd be
you
awesome.
I think you already have that,
That'd be
actually,
awesome.
if you wanted to do it.
Okay, now can you?
What?
Second. All in favor?
All right, I'll take